Lone Rider here, and I wanted to weigh in on one aspect of the gun control hysteria. I won't even say debate, but the gun control hysteria that's been sweeping the country since the recent shooting in Parkland, Florida, and it's essentially the tenor of the hysteria and the way that it's been conducted. Um, and I have an example of that here. This is an editorial from the February 25th, 2018 Star Ledger. Um, Here it is. And right in the very beginning, we have a line that describes people who oppose gun control, or in other words, who are not going along mindlessly with the current hysteria, as, quote, lobbyists willing to watch people die because they think an AR-15 is cool. This, sadly, is typical of the way things have been going lately. And you saw this at the CNN town hall following the Parkland shooting. You saw this in a lot of the other characterizations. And essentially, there were two things going on here. There's the way the gun control advocates are referring to their political opponents and characterizing their political opponents. And there's the way the opponents of gun control are characterizing the gun control advocates. The gun control supporters are characterizing anybody who doesn't agree with them as evil. They're going after them in moral or ethical terms. They're saying they're heartless fiends. They're saying they're willing to let people die. There's this either or proposition where you either support gun control or you support gun crime. So essentially, they have a view that there is no other view. There is no other take on the issue. They're essentially starting again, I won't say debate, but if we can put the term debate in quotes, I guess, for this purpose, they're starting the debate with the premise that there can't be a debate because their view is the only valid one. And to that end, you see that whether, again, like at the CNN town hall, where you had a lot of shouting and talk about being murderers and blood on your hands, or like this editorial where they're characterizing anybody who opposes or doesn't go along with the gun control agenda as willing to let people die, stuff like that. And this is typical. If you haven't been following this debate, or you're not firmly in the anti-gun camp, either because you're in the middle of the road, where a lot of people tend to be politically these days, or because you're just you're on the other side. I mean, I don't subscribe to the view of the gun control people. So to me, I've been following the issue off and on for 20 years, and I know a lot more about it than most people who aren't gun owners. But I never really, because I don't go along with it, I don't agree with it. I've been following it, but I haven't really been following it in terms of following it all that closely. And the degree of vitriol and moral condemnation that I began seeing when I started looking into the issue, again, I mean, this is something I've been following for a while, but once I started once again looking into it, I realized that there's been a tremendous shift in this country, and we were kind of working up to it. I guess I kind of could say I saw it coming, but it is saddening to see, because it's no longer a question of, oh, I just don't think you're right. It's a question of, I think you're evil. And when you get to that point, you can't have a debate. And I think for a lot of people, again, who aren't firmly in the anti-gun camp, they don't realize how extensive this is and how strongly uh, it's shaping the public discussion on the issue. Um, this is now typical of how people are talking about the issue. This is now the political orthodoxy that if you don't agree with gun control, you're a heartless fiend, um, which I think would come to a lot of people as a bit of a shock. But that's the way it's being presented, um, and I think that's telling. If you look at how a lot of the people who don't go along with the gun control agenda um, address this, they usually address it in terms of factual errors. I've said many times, I think the gun control advocates are wrong, and that's, I mean, I think they're incorrect. What else do you want me to say? If you think that somebody's incorrect, that's one thing. If you think they're evil, that's another. And so, it's worth noting that for the gun control advocates, they're characterizing their political opponents as being evil. The people who aren't going along with gun control are simply characterizing their political opponents, namely the gun control advocates, as being incorrect. There's a tremendous difference there, and I think that's one of the reasons why we haven't had a gun control debate. What we've had is a public scapegoating ceremony over the last few weeks. And it hasn't accomplished anything except to further polarize the country on this issue. And part of this, I think, is because, there's not just a contempt for people who don't go along with gun control. There's a contempt, generally speaking, for, like, it's not just that that if you're actively against gun control, that you speak out against it, that you're vilified. It's that if you even have any questions or reservations about it, you're vilified. So it's gotten to the point where unless you're marching in mindless lockstep with everybody else, you're some kind of evil, hateful person. And, part of me wonders how much of this is, cultural, demographic. You have a lot of the major news media is headquartered in large cities. A lot of those large cities have strict gun control policy. There aren't a lot of gun owners there. The people in those places may not know anybody who owns guns. They may not, um, they just have no exposure to it. And so, maybe it's just easier to look down on it as the other, but I think what you're seeing is you're seeing a movement apart. And that's why we haven't, like I said, we haven't been able to have a debate on the subject because one side, the side that questions gun control or that's against it, is still trying to talk about the facts. The other side, the gun control advocates, have moved on to just saying, you're evil. How do you respond to that? I mean, I guess you could shout, you're evil back, but then you don't have a debate. Then you just have a name calling match. And, that's sort of unfortunately what this is deteriorating into. When people on the pro-gun or anti-gun control side have, in desperation, responded to the gun control advocates with their own methodology, the gun control advocates are very quick to condemn them and say, "Oh, that's negative speech, and you're making the politics in this country more hostile." Wait. Hello, McFly? Anybody home? Have you been paying attention to anything that anybody on the other side has been saying for years? Ay, ay, ay. the unfortunately, when you have a debate or uh, an alleged debate, and I wouldn't call this a debate, but you know, this kind of a thing on a political issue, the the lowermost limit of conduct is going to be defined by the person who's willing to go the lowermost route. So, if you have all the gun control advocates out there shouting, you're evil, you have blood on your hands, you're evil, you're willing to let people die, blah, 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 it's no surprise that the debate isn't a debate anymore and it just deteriorates into name calling. But it's disingenuous to blame the NRA or anybody else for responding to years of vilification with pushing back using the same terminology. And to their credit, most of the gun control opponents are still trying to talk about the facts rather than engage in vilification. It's just unfortunately nobody is listening. And, as somebody who wants to live in a society where the laws are based on facts, where the laws are fair, where the laws are a balance between trying to do what we can to curtail crimes and respecting the rights of the citizenry, I have to say, you don't get well thought out policy from a mindless shouting match. You don't get well thought out policy when one side is busy calling names and the other side is trying to talk about the facts and nobody's listening to them. This is where we've come to on this issue, and it's worrisome and it's saddening. But I think we need to talk about not so much guns or gun control. We need to talk about the gun control debate or lack thereof. We need to talk about this fact that one side is characterizing their political opponents as evil and the other side is pointing out that they're wrong. Because that's the key thing here. That's why we haven't been able to have a good discussion about this, and that's why we haven't been able to come up with any real solutions to address the problems of guns being misused in crimes. The gun control agenda has always been kind of a distraction, but now it's getting to the point where it's like a blindfold. It's gone from being a sideshow that distracts from the problem of talking about the actual crimes to being all that people can see. This article here, or editorial rather, this editorial here, the entire editorial is about gun control opponents. They don't even talk about anything to do with the crimes. It's all about how evil you are and how bad you are if you don't support gun control. They don't mention criminal shootings in here once, except for in the context of blaming the gun control opponents for them. There's nothing in here that talks about anything without linking it to the gun control opponents and talking about it in that context. There's essentially no discussion of the issue that we're told is the issue, which is the criminal misuse of firearms. The entire focus of the editorial is that the evil gun lobby is standing in the way of a solution to a problem. But they never talk about the problem. They only talk about the evil gun lobby. And that, I think, is the real tragedy here, that, what's kind of been forgotten in all of this discussion, with one side trying to vilify the other and the other side trying to, point out some factual context to keep the debate from running off a contextual cliff, is that while you're over there denouncing the NRA and you're over there denouncing anybody who doesn't agree with you, over there is the criminal who's committing the crimes, and you've kind of forgotten about him. But that's where we are as a country on this issue. We need to get our act together.